A few years ago, Inez was facing charges for the disappearance and murder of Clara, a young girl of just 5 years old at the time of the crime, and the daughter of Renato, the sole judge in a medium-sized town. Because of this, she risked being sentenced to life in prison. During the trial, Renato presided over the courtroom, but no one anticipated how harsh the reality would be once the truth came to light. On a cloudy afternoon, Inez's trial for the alleged murder and disappearance of little Clara turned into a spectacle, capturing the attention of the entire town with the same intensity as a television drama. Daily headlines painted Inez not only as guilty, but as a true monster, stirring the imagination and disdain of the public. Newspapers and news channels competed to deliver the most sensational coverage, often at the expense of the truth. Inside the packed courtroom, the tension was palpable each day of the trial. The galleries were filled with onlookers and activists, some calling for justice while others sought mere entertainment. Judge Renato, a middle-aged man with authority, repeatedly struck his gavel to maintain order amid the constant buzz. "Silence in the court," he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The session is about to begin." At the defense table, Inez, detained in preventive custody for some years, sat upright with her eyes fixed on the judge, preparing to make his opening statement. Beside her, defense attorney Dr. Giovanna flipped through her papers with apparent calm, yet her eyes betrayed the tension she felt. Dr. Leandro, the prosecution's attorney, was a charismatic man with a magnetic presence who commanded the room. He stood and walked slowly toward the jury, pausing dramatically before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have before us is so vile, so devoid of humanity that it shocks the conscience of our community. How can one look into the eyes of an innocent child?" Dr. Leandro paused, his voice fading into a dramatic silence as he fixed his gaze on Inez, seemingly daring her to interrupt him. Inez held her head high, her eyes gleaming with determination. She knew each accusation was calculated to condemn her in the jury's eyes, even before any evidence was presented. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze in the room, judging her before the final verdict was even reached. "Clara was a vibrant girl, cherished by all who knew her," continued the attorney, his voice laden with emotion. "And now her family and this community demand justice. Judge Renato, for all that he has done for our town, deserves justice, and it is our duty to ensure that justice is served." Dr. Leandro turned to the jury, his eyes narrowing with intensity. "Throughout this trial, you will hear testimonies and see evidence that will reveal the true nature of the crime committed, and I ask you to look beyond appearances and seek the truth." With that, the prosecution attorney concluded his opening statement. Across the room, defense attorney Dr. Giovanna rose slowly, adjusting her glasses before addressing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began with a calm, measured voice, "what we will see here is not only a case but also a fight against prejudice and misinformation. My client, Inez, is suffering an unfair attack from the media and public opinion, but I urge you to consider the facts. Carefully listen to all the evidence before reaching any conclusion," Dr. Giovanna stated, looking at each jury member, trying to establish a connection. "Inez is innocent until proven guilty, and I believe that by the end of this trial, the truth will emerge, and she will be acquitted." The room fell silent as the defense attorney's words lingered in the air. Judge Renato, observing closely, gave a slight nod, indicating that the trial could proceed with the first witness being called to the stand. Everyone knew that the following days would be intense and filled with emotions. Inez's fate was at stake. Every detail and every testimony could mean the difference between freedom and conviction. Thus began the trial that would keep the town buzzing with anticipation over a struggle not just for justice, but for the truth. Amidst the chaos and misinformation, protest groups gathered daily outside the courthouse, armed with signs proclaiming slogans like "Justice for Clara" and "Out with Inez." Interviews with demonstrators frequently appeared on the news, further fueling the atmosphere of public trial. "She doesn't deserve compassion," a woman with a fiery gaze declared to the camera. "She stole a child's life. Justice must be served." In this charged environment, social media exploded with debates and theories about the case, with many echoing the baseless accusations spread by the press. Because of this, Inez's defense, represented by Dr. Giovanna, faced the tough task of changing the tide of public opinion. When approached by the media, she declared in an interview with the city's leading newspaper, "What truly shocks the conscience, ladies and gentlemen, is the ease with which we forget one of the pillars of our justice system, the presumption of innocence. As I stated at the beginning of the trial, my client has been judged by the media and condemned by public opinion before even stepping foot in this courtroom." On the streets, opinions about Inez were polarized, but predominantly negative. The faces that turned against her were a constant reminder of the mountain the defense had to climb to achieve justice. On a cloudy afternoon, after yet another tense day in court, Giovanna walked to her office, avoiding the disapproving glances from onlookers at the trial. The newspapers on the stands displayed sensationalist headlines highlighting every morbid detail of Clara's case. She felt the weight of pressure on her shoulders as she entered the cold courthouse building. Upon opening the door to her office, she found Inez seated at the table, surrounded by stacks of documents and newspaper clippings, her expression a mix of determination and exhaustion. "Inez," Giovanna began, closing the door behind her, "how are you coping with all of this?" Inez raised her weary eyes to meet hers, reflecting profound sadness. "It's difficult, Giovanna. It feels like I'm fighting against the entire world. They've already condemned me." Giovanna approached slowly and sat down across from Inez, choosing her words carefully. "We knew it would be a tough battle, but I still believe in our defense. We have evidence and testimonies that could change everything." Inez nodded, a glimmer of hope appearing in her eyes. "I trust you, Giovanna. I just hope the jury can see beyond the lies being spread." Giovanna placed her hand over Inez's, offering silent support. "They will, Inez. We will prove your innocence." No matter the cost, time was running out, but Giovanna knew there was still a chance. She would return to court the following day, prepared to confront the judge and challenge every accusation with the strength of the facts and the truth. However, Inez's image had already been distorted and transformed from a woman into a relentless monster, condemned not by evidence, but by a narrative crafted to sell newspapers and boost ratings for sensationalist television channels. As Inez sat in the defendant's chair, absorbing every word spoken, a sense of isolation enveloped her. She realized that the odds of a fair trial were dwindling with each passing day, as the collective hysteria obscured the facts of the case. Amidst the noise and condemnation, she clung to the only thing left, the truth of her innocence. In the courtroom, Judge Renato was determined to keep the pressure on Inez, wanting her to pay for the murder of his daughter. It was no secret that Dr. Leandro, the prosecution's attorney, was completely biased by the judge's opinion, violating even ethical principles of law. However, the power of being the sole judge in town prevented the case from being transferred to another court, denying Inez a more equitable trial. One day, amidst the proceedings, Dr. Leandro addressed the jury with sharp words, painting a grim picture of a woman who deserved no compassion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "what we have here is not just a brutal murder, but an act of pure cruelty. Inez not only took the life of an innocent child, but also tried to cover up her crime and deceive us all." The gazes in the courtroom turned toward Inez, some filled with disgust, others with doubt. She could feel the weight of the accusations against her, and each word from the attorney drew closer to a verdict that seemed predetermined. Across the room, Dr. Giovanna was ready to counter the accusations against her client. She stood up with determination, her gaze fixed on the jury as she began her argument. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Giovanna started, her voice steady. "What Dr. Leandro presents are conjectures based on a sensationalist narrative. There is no concrete evidence linking my client to this crime. What we have is a desperate attempt to find a scapegoat for a terrible tragedy." She looked directly at Inez, conveying through her gaze that Inez was a woman being judged not by the facts but by public opinion. We have evidence that demonstrates her innocence, and that is what we will prove. Days turned into weeks, and each courtroom session was like a new chapter of an unrelenting drama. Outside the courthouse, journalists eagerly awaited any developments that could heighten the sensation surrounding Inez's case. Social media remained ablaze with heated debates and divided opinions about Inez's guilt or innocence. Meanwhile, within the cold walls of the courthouse, Inez maintained her composure despite the constant pressure. She trusted Dr. Giovanna, who fought tirelessly at her side, holding on to the hope that the truth would finally come to light. Inez remained an enigmatic figure of serenity, a living counterpoint to the collective hysteria that engulfed the town. Her demeanor in court, marked by unshakable calm, intrigued everyone from the judge to the journalists covering every moment of the trial. On a particularly tense afternoon, after a stream of circumstantial evidence was laid out by the prosecution, Dr. Giovanna found herself once again in her office with Inez, her expression heavy with concern. "Inez, we need you to speak up, to share your version of events. Silence only feeds the speculation. We can dismantle the accusations with the truth," the attorney urged. Inez looked at Giovanna, her eyes reflecting a blend of resignation and resolve. She knew the time would come to speak and confront the accusations directly, but she wasn't ready yet. "Giovanna, I trust you," Inez began, her calm voice echoing in the empty office after a long day in court. "But if I speak, they'll judge me not by the truth, but by the emotions they wish to see in me. They want a show and to see me crumble." Giovanna nodded in understanding, sitting beside Inez. "I comprehend how you feel. But we must show the jury who you truly are. Display your humanity and sincerity. We can't allow their narrative to prevail." Inez lowered her gaze for a moment, lost in thought. The pressure of the trial weighed heavily on her, not just because of the possible conviction, but also due to how her life had been exposed to the public. "I feel like I don't even know who I really am anymore," Inez admitted in a whisper. "They've painted a picture of me that I don't even recognize." Giovanna placed a comforting hand on Inez's shoulder. "You are more than the stories told about you. You are a person with your own narrative, and we will fight for that story to be heard." However, Inez remained resolute, looking directly into the attorney's eyes with a clarity that seemed to transcend the walls of the room. "No matter what I say," she replied in a low voice, yet filled with a quiet strength, "the truth I carry challenges what they want to believe. My words would just be another whisper in the storm of their convictions." Intrigued and frustrated, the attorney persisted. "But the truth is the foundation of justice. We must trust that the truth will prevail despite the odds." Inez smiled faintly, not in disdain, but from a deep understanding born of her journey. "The truth is just a detail in times of injustice. It stays with me, even when the world turns against me. It's in this truth that I find my peace, not in the acquittal they might offer me." Even with her lawyer's insistence, Inez chose the path of silent dignity, facing the gazes of doubt and judgment, with a posture that defied explanation. That night, Inez barely managed to sleep. She replayed every detail of her life, trying to find a way to show the world who she truly was. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Clara's face, the girl whose life was tragically cut short, feeling the weight of the responsibility that pressed down on her shoulders. In the following days, as the trial neared its conclusion, the atmosphere in the courtroom became even more charged. The prosecution presented its final witnesses, each one reinforcing the narrative of guilt that had been meticulously constructed. The jury listened intently, some with tears in their eyes, while Judge Renato, fully immersed in the tragedy of his daughter, skillfully guided the testimonies to maximize emotional impact. On the other side, Giovanna watched with a serious expression, jotting down timely notes for her upcoming arguments. When it was finally the defense's turn to present its case, a palpable tension filled the air. Dr. Giovanna called her own witnesses each offering a different perspective on Inez's character and the events leading up to the tragedy. Friends and co-workers described her as kind and helpful, incapable of committing such a horrific act as portrayed in court. On the day Inez finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She faced the jury with serenity, her eyes seeking understanding and empathy in the expressions of those who would decide her fate. Her calmness was not an act of surrender, but a declaration of inner strength, a refusal to be shaken by the storms surrounding her. This mystery surrounding her tranquility only heightened the fascination. How could she remain so composed? Reporters wondered in news segments. What secret did she hide behind her silence? However, for Inez, this serenity was not a calculated strategy. It was a refuge, a space of clarity amid chaos that allowed her to face the future with her head held high. She exercised her right to remain silent during all questioning since public opinion, and the media had already influenced the jury entirely. As the trial moved into its final phases, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more tense. The closing arguments were presented, each side attempting to persuade the jury with their opposing versions of what occurred on the fateful night Clara disappeared. With precise eloquence, Giovanna highlighted the inconsistencies in the evidence put forth by the prosecution. She urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion and media judgment, but by reason and the facts pointing to Inez's innocence. On the other side of this room is a woman being judged not for her actions, but for a narrative constructed around her. Giovanna's voice echoed in the courtroom. I ask that you look beyond the sensational headlines and unfounded speculations. I ask that you see the truth. As the jurors withdrew to deliberate, Inez waited with apparent calm, although inside her heart raced with anxiety. She trusted in the defense that Giovanna had carefully built, but knew that the fate of her life now rested in the hands of strangers. Hours passed before the jury returned, their serious faces revealing the weight of the moment. Inez held her breath when the verdict was announced in the case against her for the murder of Clara. Just then the door swung open, and the Minister of Justice, a personal friend of the president, ordered the trial to be halted. Stop the trial immediately. The sentence must not be pronounced now, he declared, leaving everyone stunned. Inez looked to Dr. Giovanna, confused about what was happening, as tears welled in her eyes from the case's widespread media attention. The high political power had learned of the case and was pressured about the unconstitutionality of Judge Renato's involvement, given he was the girl's father. From now on, I will personally oversee Inez's trial. This must not influence the jury's decision in any way, but it is unacceptable for the sentence to be handed down by someone so deeply involved in the case as Judge Renato Faria. There is an evident bias here, the minister continued, before finally concluding his remarks. Tomorrow, under my command, the sentence will be announced. For now, the trial is suspended. At this moment, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Here's the rephrased text in English, keeping the character count the same and maintaining the context. The minister's words reverberated in the air, each one like a bombshell for both Inez and everyone else present. Upon returning to the cold, dim cell she had called home for the past years, Inez reflected on having gained another day before her likely sentence to life in prison. For her, that day arrived with an oppressive stillness, like the silence before a storm. As the night deepened, her thoughts revolved around distant memories of shattered dreams and a future that would never come to be. It was in this moment of desolation that Judge Renato appeared, as if to seal her fate. Even after the minister's intervention, Renato wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I came to see how you are spending your last hours before you surely face a lifetime behind bars, he said, his voice dripping with calculated coldness. I find it quite educational. Inez slowly rose, confronting him with a mix of surprise and disgust. You came to mock me, Renato? To watch up close the suffering you helped create? Renato let out a contemptuous laugh. No, Inez. I came because I wanted you to know that I have won. A lifetime in prison. That is my revenge. Inez hardened at the judge's biting words. She had faced countless battles throughout the years of trial, but confronting Renato on the eve of her execution felt like a final blow of cruelty. "Revenge," she murmured, locking eyes with him. "You call this justice?" "I call it justice, the enforcement of the law," Renato retorted, his voice echoing coldly in the cell. "You are judged by the court, and tomorrow you will be condemned for your actions. It doesn't matter if the sentence comes from me or the Minister of Justice. Justice is being served." Inez stepped back, feeling the weight of reality close in on her. She knew her defense had fought with all their might, but the facts and public opinion had sealed her fate. "I didn't kill Clara, and you know it," Inez said firmly, her voice resonating with a determination that surprised even her. "But if that's what you need to believe to justify all of this..." Renato stepped closer, looking down at her. "Believe what you want, Inez. The truth is, you will be alone with your thoughts tonight, and don't forget that the rest of your nights will be like this inside a cell." "You think that hurts me, Renato? I'm used to it. But you will have to live with what you've done and the lies you've told. That is worse than any conviction," Inez replied proudly. Renato moved to the bars with a hardened gaze. "Don't underestimate the depth of my hatred, Inez. Your hatred only reveals who you truly are, Renato. You may have locked me away forever, but you can never bury the truth. The truth lives on while your lies will die with you." She shot back. For a moment, Renato seemed to falter, as if Inez's words had struck a chord in him. However, he quickly regained his composure, his face hardening into a mask of disdain. "Enjoy this night, Inez, for the next ones will drag on until you rot in prison." With those final words, Renato turned and left, leaving Inez alone with her thoughts and the starless night. The cell became a place of shadows and silence, where Inez confronted not just the reality of her conviction, but the injustice that had haunted her from the beginning weighed heavily on her. She lay on her narrow bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in reflections about her life and what she might have been if things had turned out differently. She replayed every moment of the trial, every accusing glance, and every distorted testimony that had sealed her fate. Before falling asleep, Inez was awakened in the middle of the night by a guard bringing a simple meal. He barely glanced at her as he slid the tray through the bars. She had no appetite, but knew she needed to eat for the next day. "Don't you fear spending your entire life in prison?" the guard suddenly asked, surprising Inez with his direct question. "Fear?" she repeated, looking at him with a calm expression. "I've faced the worst. There's nothing left to fear." The guard nodded, as if her response puzzled him. He walked away silently, leaving Inez alone once again with her dark thoughts. Time seemed to lose its meaning in that cell. Every second dragged painfully as she prepared for the inevitable. She didn't know what it would be like to spend the rest of her life incarcerated, but she was determined to face her fate with the same dignity she had maintained throughout the trial. As the night dragged on toward dawn, Inez closed her eyes and sank into a silent prayer, seeking strength not only for herself, but also for those who had believed in her despite everything. The visit from the judge the night before her sentencing brought no comfort or resolution, only a cruel reminder of betrayal and loss. However, it also instilled in Inez a newfound resolve to prove her innocence, as if refusing to let Renato's hatred define the rest of her life. The next day, before a crowded courtroom once again, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick as fog. Prison staff, journalists with special permission, and a small group of curious onlookers and local officials filled the space. Their emotions ranged from morbid anticipation to evident discomfort. The tension was almost palpable, as if everyone present shared a collective breath, waiting for the final outcome of the drama that had captured the nation's attention. With her wrists and ankles shackled, Inez was led to the defense table beside Dr. Giovanna. Her step was firm, and her posture remained confident despite the weight of the chains. She faced the silent audience with a serenity that contrasted with the emotionally charged atmosphere. The Minister of Justice made a discreet gesture, and the room fell into an even deeper silence, as if the world were suspended awaiting the final verdict of justice. Ines directed her gaze to the small group that made up the jury before her eyes briefly met Dr. Giovanna's. A subtle nod, filled with gratitude and resignation, passed between them before Ines turned her attention back to the chair in front of her. The formalities were completed, and the trial was about to resume. Ines heard the distant murmur of voices around her, but her mind was focused on a place far beyond the walls that surrounded her. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength for what was to come. The curious gazes and the flashes of cameras faded to the periphery of her consciousness. The moment was approaching, and it was inevitable that she would have to face it. She took a deep breath, seeking the peace she had found in the silence of her cell. In the solitary space where she had spent so much time before, Ines's face radiated a defiant calmness. Her eyes began to scan the room repeatedly, registering every detail and every face present, until they landed on Renato, who, contrary to his usual confident demeanor, appeared restless in his seat as a spectator. The Minister of Justice finally spoke up, declaring, "I announce that the trial is resumed today. We will finally learn the verdict regarding the conviction or acquittal of Ines, accused of murdering little Clara." At that moment, Ines thought the battle was already lost, and that this was merely a formality to ensure the sentence wasn't handed down by Renato, who, as the judge and father of the murdered girl, was far too biased to deliver a fair sentence which would open the door for an appeal. However, to her surprise, the minister addressed her directly, saying, "Ines, I realize that you have not defended yourself adequately, perhaps because you felt pressured by Judge Renato's presence throughout the trial. Do you have anything to say before I proceed with the jury's decision?" "Yes, I do, and what I'm about to say could change everything," Ines declared. Everyone in the room leaned in, a murmur of surprise spreading among the attendees. Even Renato seemed to hold his breath, a shadow of concern crossing his face. Ines continued, her gaze locked on Renato's. "For a long time, I've carried the weight of a secret I could not reveal, a secret that could have changed the course of this trial from the beginning." The minister glanced at Renato, who now appeared utterly stunned, as whispers in the room grew, echoing the suspense that wafted like smoke. Ines took a deep breath, her words hanging heavy in the charged air. "I did not kill Clara. I never even hurt her, and my connection with her goes far deeper than you can imagine." A chill swept through the room as cameras flashed, capturing Renato's stunned expression. The minister rose, his voice firm, cutting through the growing commotion. "Order in the room. Explain yourself, Ms. Ines." Ines cast a quick glance at her attorney, Giovanna, whose eyes sparkled with a mix of shock and hope. "Clara did not die the way it was reported," Ines continued, her words filled with intensity. "She is alive." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room, from prison staff to journalists, could hardly believe what they had just heard. Renato was pale, his lips parted in sheer shock. The minister banged his gavel, demanding silence once more before fixing a piercing gaze on Ines. "Are you saying that Clara is alive? Tell the truth once and for all." Ines looked around, seeing the disbelief etched on every face in the courtroom. She took a deep breath again, gathering her strength to reveal the truth she had kept hidden for so long, a truth that could finally free her from the shadow of wrongful condemnation. "Clara didn't die that day, as I said," she began, her voice echoing firmly in the room. "She was taken away and hidden. I know who took her and why." The Minister of Justice raised an eyebrow, his interest fully captured by the astonishing twist in events. The room was in absolute silence, all attention focused on Ines's words, the final unfolding of a story that had begun with so much drama and tragedy. Ines once more looked directly into Renato's eyes, her expression a blend of determination and hope. With a passion and calmness that contrasted with the turmoil around her, Ines declared, "I am Clara's mother," a statement that resonated throughout the room. The collective shock was palpable. It felt as if time had stopped. Although Judge Renato portrayed himself as a victim due to his daughter's death, he seemed unconcerned about blaming the child's mother for his own evils. Renato abruptly stood up, his chair creaking under the sudden movement. "This is absurd. She's trying to manipulate the system," he shouted at the Minister of Justice, struggling to control the narrative, but his voice held a slight tremor. Inés continued, ignoring his interruption. "She's with her grandparents in a place you call hell, isn't she, Renato?" she asserted before turning to the minister. "Verify it before it's too late." Now deeply unsettled, Renato struggled to formulate a response, but Inés did not allow for interruptions. Renato's parents have cared for Clara since she vanished. They keep her hidden away from the world but ensure she is well looked after, even though the girl cannot move her legs. Inés paused, and the room fell into complete silence. No one seemed to believe her words. Renato had to conceal what he had done to his own daughter after crashing the car, condemning her to a wheelchair. That's why he's so determined to frame me and has always hidden that I am the mother of his daughter. The Minister of Justice, now thoroughly intrigued, intervened with authority. "Ms. Inés, provide immediate proof of what you are saying. This is a serious matter and cannot be used for games or tricks." Inés looked directly into the minister's eyes with a grave, resolute expression. "I'm not joking, Your Honor. From the beginning I knew something was wrong with the narrative that led to this trial, but the media condemned me in a way that left me unable to defend myself. Clara didn't die. She was simply kidnapped, and not by me. Renato has hidden this for years." The journalists in the room were frantic, and the cameras captured every word spoken by Inés as the truth began to unfold before them. The minister raised his hand, calling for silence in the room. "These are serious accusations, Ms. Inés, and you are merely circling the same point. We need proof." Inés nodded, her mind now clear and focused on the minister's request. "Renato's phone must contain the coordinates of where she is hidden. I even know the address of his parents' house. However, I need your word, Your Honor, that she will be protected and rescued from the hell where she is trapped." The room erupted into chaos as whispers grew louder, everyone trying to comprehend the implications of this turn of events. Giovanna, Inés's attorney, quickly stepped forward. "I demand an immediate suspension of this trial to investigate new evidence." Renato, now visibly shaken, tried to maintain his facade of indignation. "She's lying. This is a desperate trick." However, the seed of doubt had already been planted. The Minister of Justice, with a now seriously grave expression, declared, "The trial is suspended. We will investigate this claim immediately." The room fell silent as the Minister of Justice contemplated his next words. It was an unexpected twist, a moment that could rewrite not only Inés's story but also Clara's fate. "If your words prove to be true, I promise your sentence will be reviewed. Renato will remain under judicial supervision until your innocence is established." The minister then turned to Renato. "And if you are found guilty, you know very well what your fate will be after all these years banging the gavel in this court, right?" Still stunned and furious, Renato was escorted out of the room while the investigation was set in motion. Inés sat for a moment, her heart racing as she exchanged a look with Giovanna, one of intensity that only the most observant would notice. It was a gaze that spoke volumes without words. The truth was finally beginning to crack the surface of the lies built up over the years. Inés's revelation not only interrupted the trial, but also opened a sea of possibilities that could completely redefine the case. The destinies of Inés, Clara, and even Renato now hung by a thread of uncertainty. In the days that followed, an intensive investigation was launched to find Clara and verify Inés's claims. Social media and newspapers buzzed with debates and theories about the case as attorneys from both sides prepared for the legal ramifications. Renato, now facing public disgrace, attempted to reaffirm his position as a judge while confronting pointed questions about his conduct in the case. Meanwhile, the allegation that Clara was alive and hidden with Renato's grandparents turned the case upside down. The tension was palpable as the public awaited news of crucial developments that could change everything. Inés was transferred to a new temporary cell and held under strict security. Giovanna worked tirelessly to ensure her client was safe and that the truth would emerge. Days later, in a surprising twist, Clara's grandparents were located, and police teams were immediately dispatched to the isolated farm mentioned by Inez. Upon arrival, they encountered a remarkable scene. Clara, now 10 years old, was playing in the garden under the watchful eye of an elderly couple who identified themselves as the girl's great-grandparents. The great-grandfather explained in a trembling voice, "My grandson, Renato, brought Clara to us 5 years ago, saying her mother had been involved in a terrible accident and that it was dangerous for Clara to stay in the city." The discovery was met with a mix of relief and outrage as Clara was carefully examined by medical professionals to ensure her well-being. Renato was summoned to provide clarification, and his version of events was confronted with the evidence found at the farm. His defensive demeanor began to crumble as the days passed. A special hearing was convened to review Inez's case in court. The atmosphere was charged with expectation and tension. Inez, now dressed in civilian clothes and with a determined expression, sat beside her attorney, Giovanna. The room was packed with journalists eager for details and supporters of Inez calling for justice. The Minister of Justice began the session with a solemn tone. "This court has been called to consider new evidence presented by Inez's defense, alleging serious manipulation of evidence and unethical conduct by Judge Renato." His voice echoed throughout the room, capturing the attention of everyone present. Then Giovanna stood up, her eyes fixed on the judge. "Your Honor, the new evidence reveals that Clara is not only alive, but was secretly kept by her own father, who is also the judge in this case. Renato has not only concealed crucial information from this court, but also manipulated testimonies and evidence to wrongfully convict my client." Renato, visibly tense and pale, tried to interrupt. "This is absurd. I acted in the best interest of justice in danger, and I only took measures to protect her." The minister raised his hand to silence Renato. "You will have your chance to explain yourself, Renato. First, we will hear all the evidence presented by the defense. For hours, testimonies were heard, documents were examined, and the words of Clara's great-grandparents were crucial in revealing the truth." Renato's story began to crumble before everyone's eyes as his conduct was rigorously condemned. At the end of the day, the minister spoke again, his expression grave, reflecting the seriousness of the moment. "Based on the new evidence presented, this court determines that there has been a serious manipulation of the course of justice by Judge Renato Faria, violating the principles of law and justice in this country. Inez, you are officially free from the charges of Clara's disappearance and alleged murder." A collective sigh filled the room, followed by subdued applause from Inez's supporters. Renato in the defendant's chair was pale and motionless, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. The legal battle was far from over, but for Inez, this moment represented more than mere acquittal. It was the redemption of a woman who had faced injustice head-on, proof that the truth, however late, prevails. Meanwhile, this revelation was a devastating blow to Renato's defense. The evidence was undeniable, and his web of lies began to unravel. Back in the interrogation room, the minister confronted Renato with the new evidence. "Renato, your daughter has been found alive with her grandparents, exactly where Inez said she would be." The minister crossed his arms, fixing him with a piercing gaze. Realizing the game was over, Renato lowered his head, his expression finally crumbling. "I just wanted to protect my career, Minister. I didn't know what else to do. If I were arrested for driving, I would lose everything and could never explain how Clara ended up in a wheelchair without revealing the accident." The minister, his voice heavy with contempt, replied, "Protecting your career at the cost of truth, justice, and even your own daughter is unacceptable. Eventually, the truth always comes to light." Subsequent investigations unveiled the extent of Renato's scheme. He had manipulated evidence to incriminate Inez, using his influence to orchestrate Clara's kidnapping and concealment, all in a desperate attempt to safeguard his reputation. This revelation shook the judicial system and public opinion. Renato was swiftly stripped of his title as judge and faced serious criminal charges. In a cruel twist of fate, he was incarcerated in the very prison where Inez had spent several years of her life. now a convict, facing the prospect of a sentence as harsh as the one he once tried to impose on her. As the news spread, the atmosphere in public opinion was a mix of shock and relief for Inez's supporters, finally free from the unjust accusations that had haunted her. Inez now faced a new chapter in her life. The reconciliation with Clara was the primary focus, as the bond between mother and daughter, after years torn apart by Renato's cruel scheme, promised to be challenging. Giovanna, her tireless attorney, was now dedicated to seeking justice for Inez, suing the state for her wrongful imprisonment, and fighting to restore her reputation while offering both Inez and Clara a fresh start. In the halls of the Ministry of Justice, discussions about ethical reforms and revisions of judicial procedures gained momentum. Inez's case not only revealed the individual corruption of certain judges, but also shone a light on systemic failures that allowed such injustices to occur. From this, a new hope began to rise for Inez. Her story was not just one of survival, but of resilience, courage, and ultimately, restored justice. In the weeks following her release from prison, Inez was greeted by a crowd of supporters and journalists. Her face, now marked by determination and resilience, contrasted sharply with the weary and defeated image the public had seen in the early days of the trial. Clara, still processing the idea that her mother had been labeled a criminal for so long, stood by her side in her wheelchair, holding her hand tightly. Together, Inez and Clara faced the challenge of rebuilding their relationship, initially marred by forced separation and the pain of injustice. Mother and daughter found comfort and strength in one another, determined to turn their experience into something positive. Inez founded a support center for victims of legal injustices and abuses of power. The center not only provided emotional and legal support, but also advocacy and education to prevent future cases of injustice. Over time, the bond between Inez and Clara flourished. Together, they healed from the pains of the past and discovered a greater purpose in helping others who faced unequal legal battles. Their story became a beacon of hope and resilience, inspiring many to fight for justice and believe in the power to transform adversity into strength. Inez and Clara walked together toward the future, united in their mission to ensure their voices were heard, and their experiences served as a warning against the abuse of power. Thus, Inez's narrative not only closed a painful chapter, but also paved the way for a new beginning where justice and truth triumphed over manipulation and injustice. Thank you for joining me and sharing this story. If you enjoyed the narrative, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below about what you thought of the story. Until next time.